Us the People was founded on January 25, 2020 in Braamfontein, Johannesburg. The organization was formed following the founding summit, which brought together activists, students, workers, and experts from various fields under the need to pursue the equal freedom of all in a stateless society. Us the People is an organization with a futuristic outlook and shall propel its principles and ideas in all spheres of society. Us the Students is the student organization of Us the People, and is responsible for teaching alternative knowledge to society. Us the Workers is the labor organization of Us the People, and is responsible for organizing skills for production and self-sustenance of societies. Us the People is an organization based on the principles of freedom, self-reliance, collectivism, and self-governance. Our main principle is equal freedom, implying that each member of society must be able to enjoy their freedom and take responsibility for their actions, without compromising the freedom of another. For Us the People, changing our society requires change within each individual member of the society. Specifically, a change in the thinking of each of us, which will change how we perceive things, and ultimately our practices as individuals and collectively as societies. Us the People aim to realize individual freedom and well-being of all. Amid all manipulation and division of people over constructs of identities, we are brought together by recognition of our origin, being, conviction, and principles, which do not form the basis of exclusion or harm. Our birthplace is Earth, our race is human, our religion is love, and our politics are freedom. Logo of Us the People shall be the map of the earth, the birthplace of all people. The continents shall be colored red and black with the land mass surfaced by people across the world. The red shall represent the misery endured by oppressed and exploited people throughout the earth, and the black shall represent the anti-authoritarianism and self-determination stance adopted by Us the People as a necessity for freeing our minds from enslavement. The ocean and background shall be black with green matrix codes. The binary system shall be presented in two different numeral systems. The binary codes represent universal laws and knowledge. The matrix background represents a call for people to gradually withdraw from the corrupted way of thinking and living and simultaneously restore within ourselves and our society principles from within us. People are trapped in a complex matrix, and are being manipulated through division, fear, violence, greed, and ignorance. Transcending this matrix requires a new way of thinking, rooted in freedom, collectivism, love, peace, and truth. There shall be mathematical formulas within the earth. At the top, Euler's formula, comprising of the 5 most important mathematical constants, representing the one intelligent energy that is all. The frequency formulas represent the vibration of energy at different levels, resulting in the expression of the one, in varied forms. The formulas also represent light and sound, which transmit energy as particles or waves, and are expressed and interpreted in the universal language, frequency. Lining the earth shall be the vortex math numbers, presented using a hieroglyphic numeral system, with 369 highlighted in gold. The vortex math numbers represent the repeated pattern of numbers, which defines a vortex, the deepest structure in the universe, which is the key to understanding all of math, all of physics, and all of metaphysics. The vortex math numbers represent the contracting and the expanding elements of the external physical plane, as well as the internal and subtle aspect of consciousness. Above the earth shall be a gold infinity symbol. The infinity symbol represents energy, that which cannot be created or destroyed, but manifests in different forms, and is eternal. The infinity symbol also represents the Trinity. In universal systems, energy is present in 3 states: a positive outflowing aspect, a negative, receptive aspect, and a neutral, integrating aspect. The center of the infinity symbol represents the eternal now, where the past and the future intersect. Preamble. Since the inception of human life on Earth, people have always strived to achieve freedom, giving rise to liberation struggles throughout history, as well as struggles for individual freedom. This remains an important part of humankind's heritage as it challenges the contemporary view that it is human nature to be greedy and competitive. Such views have been maintained by historical institutions of domination, from monarchs to modern-day statist forms of government. The principle and fact of government gave rise to misery among human beings. However, this has only prevailed because mankind has allowed itself to be governed for too long. Customs that are beneficial to humanity have been replaced by laws. These laws have been enforced by terror, to protect the privilege of the ruling minority at the expense of the masses. Since the establishment of systems of government based on authority, people have participated in resistance against domination, oppression, and exploitation. Various social systems have been applied: monarchs, dictatorships, and representative democracy. However, the conditions of the masses have always remained essentially the same. Having noticed that the freedoms achieved by the oppressed have been replacements of one domination by another, most people have given up on resistance. While the conditions of the masses make change desirable, it is evident from the lack of active citizenry among people in society that there is a need for an alternative and futuristic thinking, in our quest to achieve freedom from all forms of domination, oppression, and exploitation. Political freedom and other partition freedoms achieved by people in states throughout the 1900s were largely based on ideas that maintain systems of dominance. However, as a generation we strive to achieve equal freedom of all. Advancements in science and technology have provided us with a better understanding of human relations with nature, as well as the realization of the necessity to oppose the state and all forms of monopolies, not for our sake, but for the sake of the future of humanity. Human minds are locked in a complex matrix, and our decision is to unplug all minds from the need to dominate and addiction to be dominated. Important terms. The following have been identified as important terms and they will be used in this manifesto with the following meaning. Freedom is referred to in this manifesto in a social context. In this context, it is either my freedom is greater than that of another person, by occurring at his or their expense, in which case they are not free, or it is less than that of another person or group, at my expense, in which case I am not free. In either case there is no state of freedom. Freedom can, therefore, mean nothing other than equal freedom, not equality, for all, which is essentially identical with non-domination. Domination is a state of unequal freedom. Here the freedom of some is greater than the freedom of others and occurs at the latter's expense and against their will. Thus, a condition of unequal freedom which exists with the consent of the disadvantaged is not domination. Force is the physical or mental coercion exercised in an aggressive way. Defense against such aggression, including physical means, should thus not be considered as force. Ideologies are statements which are, in essence or subject, beyond empirical proof or refutation because they contain at least some elements which go beyond experienced reality. Democracy is an ideology which submits the interests of individuals to the pretended interest of a majority, or of the abstractions people or state. Democracy presupposes and aims at a state of unequal freedom. Introduction. This manifesto offers facts and arguments that support the creation of an alternative way of thinking, which is necessary for people to destroy all oppressive and exploitative structures of the establishment, laying the basis for a new social order, devoid of primitive ideologies. It presents the reader with an inevitable challenge, either to submit to aggressive forces of the establishment or live to create a society of non-domination and equal freedom. We come before you, us the people, to pronounce our principles. Humanity has traveled far since the olden days, through all historical struggles, to modern society. Among all living species, human beings are the only species to have expressed any form of aggression towards their own, and throughout modern history, there have always existed social groups, divided into those who are enslaved, and the privileged few. Uprisings have succeeded uprisings, social institutions have changed, the form of denomination, currency, has changed. Some minimal fractions of the exploited and suppressed humans have succeeded in emancipating themselves and being welcomed among the ruling classes, but the conditions of people have always remained essentially the same, with the ruling classes enjoying more freedom at the expense of the freedom of others. Evidence from history and the present suggests that in all societies, there exists only two groups of people, those who want to live by their own work, and those who want to live by the work of others. Practically, a line can be drawn between those who want to enlarge their own sphere of freedom by force, at the expense of the freedom of others, or wish to maintain a state which already ensures such an imbalance of freedom and those whose goal is the equal freedom of everyone, and who, therefore, do not require additional freedom for themselves at the expense of the freedom of others. Human beings, especially primitive ones, created a vast number of social concepts which do not correspond to reality at all. Furthermore, there exists a plethora of superstitious concepts, which have manifested themselves in insufficient logic, hallucinations, insecurity of judgment and fear of thought. Besides such superstitions, humans are also enslaved by prejudices. Often even highly intelligent people succumb to prejudices. The way a prejudiced person understands something is already essentially determined before he receives any information on a subject. Their personal experience of the subject plays a part only insofar as it supports the already given tendency to judge the matter. Opposite experiences are simply ignored. There is no desire to include something new in their faith but, on the contrary, an inclination to continue believing whatever they already believe, regardless of facts and logic. The superstitious person easily becomes a fanatic against those who see reality too clearly to see wonderful or dreadful things. The socially prejudiced person does not judge their own material and cultural situation or that of their fellow species, according to truly realistic and rigorous standards, but according to a systematically distorted image of the social conditions, an image whose origin the person can hardly explain but which they defend, against critics as one of their holiest and most untouchable possessions. Through appeals to reason, but always one's own reason, never that of others, very contrary opinions have often been uttered. Reviewing world history or merely daily experience, it becomes evident that only a small minority really have and use reason in their daily lives. As the misery around us is increasing year by year, the prevalence of reason leads us to the inevitable determination that, beyond the tasks to which the efforts of an individual are enough, there are those tasks that demand the participation of several individuals and common means, and considering that total freedom for all needs the participation of all of us the people, organized and agreed, organization becomes necessary. Organization arises from the consciousness that, for a certain purpose, the cooperation of several forces is necessary. When this purpose is achieved, the necessity for cooperation stops, and each force reassumes its previous independence ready for other cooperation and combination if necessary. This is the necessary organization in our society which us the people envisage for the purpose of achieving equal freedom and well-being for all. There can be no true humanity, no true self-respect, without self-reliance. No one can help us if we do not help ourselves. Us the people do not promise to do anything for anyone, we do not want anything from anyone, we only appeal to everyone, to cooperate with us to bring about a state of society which will make freedom and well-being possible, for all. The Manifesto of Us the People launches a critical attack upon prevalent stereotyped ideas about the nature of the modern state and the system of monopoly capitalism together with proposed alternatives. The Manifesto goes on to present knowledge that is the basis for new individual thought processes and collective relations, which are necessary for emancipation. The Manifesto also presents concrete suggestions to be considered as strategies for the realization of equal freedom and well-being for all. Chapter 1. The State. There are many people who proudly speak of our state, and they are by no means only those privileged by it. They cannot at all imagine an existence without the state. Why? Because those who are interested in their own predominance fear non-domination as the end of their hegemony and privilege. Thus, they have falsified the concept of statelessness by equating it with chaos and disorder. As people who neither want to rule others nor want to be ruled by others, we do not think at all of stopping the worshippers of the state from submitting themselves even to the most absurd measures of manipulation or exploitation or from enjoying all alleged or actual advantages which a state may offer. The only thing that we will not allow is for such a state to subject others who are unwilling to be part of it, to its rule. Today the state takes upon itself to meddle in all the areas of our lives. From birth until the grave, it wants to parent us. Sometimes as the national government, sometimes as the provincial government, and sometimes even as the local or municipal government. It follows our every step, it appears at every corner, it taxes, harasses, and restricts us. The huge and ever-growing amounts of money which the states appropriate from the PEOP to maintain itself is never enough. Through its accumulation of debt, the state always exists at the expense of future generations. Whom do these states owe? Must present and future generations continue to pay for the expenses accrued before their birth by having to offer their labor in exchange for a currency that entirely returns to the state as taxes, rates, fines, levies? The state today is evidently a tool of the controllers against the exploited, of the employer against the laborers. What is the use of the state? Is it to prevent the exploitation of the worker by the greedy? Of the tenant by the landlord? Is it to assure people work? To protect people from the loan sharks? To give people sustenance? To breastfeed a child whose mother is lost to the negligence of medical professionals in public health? Nothing, no, by no means, never, no ways and not at all. The state is there to protect exploitation, speculations, and privatization of natural resources as individual property. The people must only rely on their own hands. The people must expect nothing of the state. After all, the state is nothing more than an organization established to inhibit emancipation by any means, including killing. Everything in the state is directed in favor of the lazy authoritarian, owner, landlord, manager, everything against the people who actually do work and produce. From the state education system, which from an early age corrupts the child by inculcating anti-human principles, to the law, which corrupts justice and limits people's experiences, to politics, which isolate those who will not be corrupted, to money, which is used to manipulate people to leave their families and households to work until they retire, to media, which manipulate people's perceptions and silences the truth, to public health, which deteriorates the health of people for the benefit of pharmaceutical companies. Such is the state. What is the state? A few people declare a piece of the earth's surface, a certain area, including all that exists above and beneath, to be their property and give it the name of a state. Then everyone who lives in this area is called a citizen, and they are surrounded by borders, which give them a nationality. All people living within these borders, the citizens or subjects, are under the authority or control, subordinated, of this state and are subjected to whatever laws applied in this state. Whoever does not respect these laws voluntarily, is compelled to do so through the authorized use of force. Accordingly, the state is based on force. The state is not the only form of human association. There are forms of human association, which are most often referred to as society or societies. What is society? As its name already expresses, it is an association, the union of a smaller or larger number of people for a certain purpose. Where two people come together, even if simply for a conversation, they form a society. The forms of these societies and associations are as different as their purposes can be. A common example is burial societies, where people voluntarily associate for purposes of burying their loved ones. The societies are formed and joined by voluntary association, without restrictions based on geographic area, All members contribute according to their ability and benefit what they deserve. No one steals from others without consequences, and anyone may withdraw from the society. What is the difference between state and society? It is that the society is a free association while the state is not. A society includes those people who want to belong to it and who are accepted by it, regardless of where they are, or where they come from. A state confines all people living within a certain area, even when they do not want to belong to it. It accepts them even against their will. Indeed, it encloses all those people, but it is not a society of all the people. In the state, a minority is always opposed to a majority. The state is an association of some people against others. State and society are therefore not similar and equal but completely different concepts which exclude each other. To mistake them to be alike is to confuse the basis of human social life altogether. They are natural enemies and, consequently, they fight each other constantly. The victory of one means the fall of the other and vice versa. Society is a free association, it knows only free and equal members. The state, however, is a forced association, it knows only dominators and dominated, unfree and unequal subjects. The state stands above the individual, it is their master. The society stands beneath the individual, it is their servant. The essence of the state is thus coercion, the essence of society is freedom. In addition to the state, there exists another form of oppression and exploitation. The most dangerous means of exploitation is, firstly, the private ownership of land, which is protected by the state. Secondly, there is the money monopoly of the state, currency. Any privilege and monopoly or oligopoly that does not have the voluntary consent of all, means a restriction of the equal freedom of all. It requires and results in the privileged person or the monopolist having, like the ruler, an excess of freedom at the expense of the equal freedom of all. Not every property constitutes at the same time a monopoly. One must especially distinguish between property in goods which can be multiplied, even if not without limit, and property which, like land and natural resources, is available only in limited quantities at a time. One must especially differentiate between property in the product of one's labor, or in what was exchanged for the product of one's own work, and property in what nature offers free to all, without labor, such as the land for living and producing, the air we breathe, the water that nourish all, and the sun that is the light. In this, the basic substance offered by nature must, again, be distinguished from property which is acquired by improving land and by the extraction and processing of natural resources. Land, which is in limited supply and is becoming continuously more valuable as population increases. It also varies greatly according to the quality of soil, resources, and especially location, is one of the so-called natural monopoly goods. As a source of food and raw materials, and the site for any production, land is a necessary foundation for the existence of every human being, not different from air and water. One need only imagine air, like land today, being the property of a relatively small minority. Then the great majority would be subject to some breathing charges, example in such a way that each person would have to walk about with a measuring device in front of their nose and would have to pay for their air consumption. This idea is no more absurd than the modern-day right of land ownership. Its essence lies in the fact that the landowner may not only use a piece of land for his personal cultivation or habitation but may also exclude others from utilizing an area far greater than they themselves need. It allows the landowner to impose charges upon others which they must continuously pay to exist. These imposed charges not only openly in rent and lease contracts but are also hidden in the prices of all goods and amount, fundamentally, to nothing other than a modern kind of slavery. Chapter 2 Representative Democracy. The most prevailing political system today is representative democracy, in which every few years or so, the electorate vote to determine who will control them. This system legitimizes the establishment, by giving the illusion that somehow the votes are in charge of running the system. Middle-class politicians are prepared to humble themselves before the electorate, issuing all sorts of promises. Obviously, this leveling of candidates before the populace disappears the day after the election once they are transformed into public representatives in a legislative body. The workers continue to go to work, the unemployed continue to sit, while public representatives are having no significant purpose than to make the people believe that something is being done for the community, and that the public interest is well looked after. The people obey all these laws, whilst the state, in the alleged interest of all, in reality in the interest of the property owners and of its own power, violates them all and commits numberless crimes which are glorified as deeds in the interest of humanity. Generations that came before the 21st century claim to have fought for freedom, and further proclaim to have brought about freedom. Is this the freedom that was fought for? That which only leaves people free to starve. People still believe in charlatans who, under the pretext of doing good for the people, ask the people for support, people's votes, and then go on top to oppress, irritate, and exploit the same people. In numerous historical cases, the power of a class of rulers was defeated, but, always lasting the struggle between men, the new victors replaced the ancients and the people had only changed their masters. Us the people desire the cessation of representative democracy as the prevalent political system because of it is an expression of the inequality of power which exists in society. While constitutions guarantee the rights of citizens and equality before the law, the reality is that the minority elite is in permanent control. So long as people are economically exploited by those in control and there are gross inequalities of wealth, there cannot be real democracy. Evidently, economic facts are much stronger than political rights, because so long as there is economic privilege there will be political domination by the wealthy over the exploited. In the modern world of statism, it is assumed that the people rule. However, the reality is that minorities of elites necessarily do the governing. A privileged few who have access to wealth, education, and leisure time, are clearly better equipped to govern than ordinary working people, who generally have little free time and only a basic education. This is the case even under the governments of communist parties, because even a government of the previously oppressed and exploited becomes oppressors and exploiters. Only personal and direct control over our lives will ensure that justice and freedom prevail. To grant political sovereignty to others, whether under the disguise of democracy, republicanism, a communist state, or whatever, is to give others control and therefore domination over our lives. The democratic state is a contradiction since the state is essentially about force, authority, and domination and is necessarily based upon an inequality of wealth and power. Democracy, in the sense of self-rule for all, means that no one is ruled. If no one rules, there can be no state. Limited benefit could be derived from us the people as a party and its participation in election campaigns, which are not to be rejected on principle, for such participation offers propagandist possibilities, otherwise unused, for the publication of us the people's approach to organizing society as an alternative. Also, since due to permanent and comprehensive aggression by the state the opportunities to resist it are quite limited, one should also use the possibility at least to limit aggression by the state by gaining votes, if not to abolish it altogether in this way. This could well be accompanied by a continuous protest against the majority principle within a compulsory community and against the state principle altogether. Us the people delegates in any decision-making structures, while strictly bound to the instructions given them by their voters, should collaborate only with measures to reduce privileges and monopolies and the monopolistic character of the state itself and should abstain from all activities which would amount to co-governance. These delegates, who could at the same time also represent the autonomous protective and social communities formed apart from the state, could, finally, supervise, or even administer themselves, the procedure for the liquidation of the state. Of course, the above-mentioned option is only one of the possibilities for emancipation from the state. Us the people shall by no means have to confine itself to gathering votes and to working towards a liquidation of the state by legislatures. Instead, its main task would be to do what all parties have so far failed to do, and what should result in the rapid growth of this new party, offer immediate concrete advantages and not only promises of what will happen after political power is gained. In this respect, much more can already be done today than is generally considered possible. Chapter 3, The Limitations of Marxism. Some of the predictions that followed from Karl Marx's apparent strict scientific observations have been explicitly refuted by developments that are observable within modern history. The theory of pauperization, according to which the proletariat in a capitalistic society is continuously kept at subsistence level, is wrong. Although the economic system of exploitation has not brought general affluence, it is obvious that in modern states, a much higher standard of living has been achieved, especially for the countless workers, than under the state socialism of communist parties, and the realization of the communist paradise as described in the Communist Manifesto of 1848 has not occurred even after decades of existence of socialist states. In the 21st century, we ought to discredit the central thesis of the Marxist theory, because with the rationalization and automation of production, the number of manual laborers is continuously decreasing, diminishing the prospects of a majority made up of proletarians, the working portion of the population. It is evident that the application of the Marxist system would necessarily lead to the replacement of one repression by another, as exemplified in the states that are dominated by communist parties. We oppose the Marxist idea of dictatorship of the proletariat, which was, in effect, supposed to be a transitional state on the way to stateless communism. Marx and Engels, in the Communist Manifesto of 1848, had written of the need for labor armies under state supervision, the need for a centralist and directed economy, as well as widespread nationalization. A proletarian state consisting of millions of people governing on their own behalf is impossible, and as a result, the proletariat entrusts the task of government to a small group of elite politicians. Once the role of government is taken out of the hands of the majority of people, a new class of professional politicians arises. They masquerade as the true expression of the people's will, while the institutionalist political power gives rise to a new group of governors with the same self-seeking interests and the same cover-ups of dubious dealings. A command economy, where the state is owner, organizer, director, financer, and distributor of labor and resources as Marxists envisage, means that decisions flow from top to bottom. As a program, the Communist Manifesto culminates into absolutist aggressive force, the supreme command over all means of production in the hands of the greatest and most violent monopolist. This monopolist, the state, forces itself upon society and consumes people's entire productive efforts through an absolute monopoly over the public supply of goods, through an absolute monopoly over the demand for labor, and through a monopoly over production planning. This is the most sinister falsification of the concept of socialism, which aims to eliminate all domination and exploitation. Marxism sees the real evil in economic exploitation by large private corporations. But it misconstrues the historical role of the state, which not only institutionalized this exploitation but, as its main task, also defends it constantly and even has added another exploitation too, that by the apparatus of state for itself. Marxism equates nationalization of the means of production with the abolition of classes and expects from this the automatic disappearance of the state. This is a theory which is self-contradictory and has been clearly proven wrong by the so-called communist states with their new class divisions and their totalitarian state systems. Marxism's primitive theory of surplus value has especially contributed to its wrong conclusions. It explains only one factor of exploitation, and this only within the sphere of production. It has overlooked the much more important role of interest and land rent and also exploitation in other economic and social spheres, as for example in commerce. It is important to note that Marxism mixes up cause and effect by considering political as well as mental domination as a result and mere superstructure of economic exploitation, while in reality, the opposite is true. Domination is the precondition and cause of economic exploitation. Believers in communist states are of the mistaken opinion that by these states under the control of the workers the rule of woe man over woe man is eliminated. In fact, domination is only taken over by the state, i.e., by the party which commands the state functionaries. But do not the functionaries of the state, and party members standing above them, practice domination also, and are they not woe men as well? Those who enjoy so many hidden privileges, and in the hands of those dominating in the communist states there is also such an enormous amount of power and prestige, that this means more for most of the Communist Party officials than the amount of their income. Above all, there is an immense difference between the freedom of the one group and the freedom of the others, and at the expense of the latter. Us the people hold that this condition, maintained only by aggressive force, must be eliminated, as well as any other domination altogether. Us the people, by comparison, do not strive to achieve a new society which will arise only in the far future by means of coercive re-education but, rather, one that is possible in the present and that does not require a dictatorship or the subjugation of others. Instead, it requires only withdrawal of people's trust and consent from established authority, as well as establishment of a few organizations, based upon voluntarism for the guarantee and defense of the equal freedom of all. Chapter 4 Equal freedom of all. Historically, the liberties that humans have celebrated have been incomplete parts of freedom. Largely, such liberties are granted by the privileged, who reserve for themselves greater freedom at the expense of others. Like in systems of liberalism, where freedom and dignity are reserved for the greatest number of individuals, and not for all. Equal freedom of all involves everyone not being coerced by the will of another, be it an individual or group, either to do or neglect anything, and renouncing oneself from any aggressive attempt to force one's own will upon others. Under such conditions, the external freedom sphere of anyone is never smaller than that of another individual, unless voluntarily consented by the individual, and there is no excess of freedom for some at the expense and against the will of others. It also means the absence of any oligopoly or monopoly, and of any privilege for an individual or group. For this would be an excess of freedom at the expense of all others. If someone voluntarily limits their own freedom of action in favor of another person and grants the other a privilege or monopoly towards themselves, then it is not infringement of the equal freedom of all. Much of what is accepted as morality results from the principle of equal freedom for all. For example, a murderer or killer presumes a greater freedom of action for themselves at the expense of the victim, who is deprived of life by the action of the murderer, thus limiting the victim's freedom in the most ultimate way. This applies to any act of aggression against the will and at the expense of a victim who is deprived of their property. Thus, equal freedom of all means mutual freedom from aggressive intervention by another, self-determination within mutuality, and the inviolability of the non-aggressive individual. Within a condition of the equal freedom of all, no one can give orders to anyone unless the one ordered about first authorizes the commander. Force is permissible only insofar as it serves as a defense against aggressive intervention. Any form of laws, customs, or practices which limit a person's sphere of freedom against their will, in favor of excessive freedom for others, are nothing but aggressive force. Ideological and moral writings of faith have been used historically to justify groups obtaining excessive freedom for themselves at the expense of others. Voluntary agreement is fundamental to equal freedom of all, for example, authorizing a surgeon to interfere with one's body. This is within the framework of the equal freedom of all, because while in the process, the sphere of action of the authorized person is larger than that of the one giving their approval, it is by voluntary agreement. One may only limit their own freedom by a contract in favor of another person. Economic exploitation, the result of individual ownership of the land, raw materials, and means of production by the minority elites and banks is the basis of the present misery experienced by people. But the system which produces it would have long ago broken down if it were not upheld on one hand by the state, with its armies of officials, soldiers, and police, the whole machinery of government, and on the other hand by the people themselves, who obediently submit to their own humiliation and degradation. If people want to be free, and want to enjoy the fruits of their sweat, if people want to live a life worthy of humans, we must count only on our own strength. People whose comfort and luxury depends on your misery cannot be friends with you. You suffer hunger and cold because you have nothing, and you must beg to work for those who have taken over the land and your labor. Take the land and your labor, which is not individual property of anyone, and work on your own. Belief in and submission to authority is the root cause of all people's misery. The remedy we recommend and are in pursuit of is, struggle in thought, words, and action against all authority, whether it be that of physical force identical with the state or that of dogma and belief, the product of ages of ignorance and manipulation of human minds from childhood, such as patriotism, obedience to the law, belief in the state, submission to the rich and titled. Chapter 5 Land and Labor. The equal freedom of all includes, in principle, the equal claim of every individual to the whole earth, air, and water. The earth's surface, including rivers, dams and oceans, with its natural resources, as the primary and basic prerequisite for every human existence, and essential for food, shelter, and a working place, is available only in limited quantity, and the quality of the land, as well as its site, also play an important part. Land and natural resources are means of production, but means of production that are given by nature and need not be worked for. Thus, everybody has an equal claim to use land, and no one has a privilege over it that can be proven or justified. If anybody prevents the use of this gift of nature or makes it dependent on the payment of any rent, resulting in unearned income for them, then they are claiming a privilege that cannot be justified and committing an aggressive act, even if this is legalized by some law. Individual ownership of land means, among other things, that all who are born later are fundamentally disadvantaged, since, due to increasing demand, pieces of land become more and more expensive, and owners are also less and less willing to sell. In any case, it means the right to exclude all others from the use of the piece of land concerned, even though they are entirely dependent upon such land, at least as a place to live and work, while they may raise the exact same claim to its use as the owner. Individual ownership in land means especially the right to extort rent, unearned income from others, based upon a claimed but unjustifiable privilege. The achievement of equal freedom for all in land and natural resources requires the equal access for everyone to land and everyone's equal share in the use of this means of production, but at the same time excludes any privilege, monopoly, and oligopoly of individuals, groups or institutions over land and its resources. For this purpose, today's landowners need only be stripped of their privilege, and they need not be deprived of the value of their genuine possessions, which they may continue to utilize within the new framework, with rights completely equal to those of all others. In respect the state taking custody of land, no nationalization of land is justifiable, as it only amounts to the replacement of the handful of privileged individual owners by one single monopolist. After all, it is the state which protects and maintains individual property in land, as well as other greedy practices and privileges. State officials do not represent the interests of all citizens equally. Instead, they are primarily running dogs of the elite controllers, managing the subjects on their behalf. Moreover, seeing that state officials are controlled by economic and political organizations outside of those who elect them, they one-sidedly represent the interests of the minority, the elite rulers, against the interests of the majority, the people, at the expense of the latter group. The control of money and credit have even greater consequences than the control of land and resources. Here the state monopolizes the issue of exchange media, money, by transferring it to a central note-issuing bank, which thus obtains the right to issue banknotes as legal tender, and instead of paying interest, it demands interest payments for these. Moreover, this interest lies far above the cost of the production and administration of this means of exchange. Thus, we have here, in the first place, a typically monopolistic exploitation through exclusion of competition, and this directly emanates from the state. Furthermore, the state manipulates the business of banks, which can to a limited extent create so-called book money, out of nothing, for which they charge the monopoly interest of the central note-issuing bank besides their own interest charges. Considering the principle and practice of centrally controlled trade, undoubtedly, cash will soon become unnecessary, as well as today's check payments and bank transfers, in favor of digitized and cashless monetary system. The centrally controlled means of trade keeps the people in permanent dependence upon the state and banks, which in turn exploit the people. People do not accept the currency used in the states in which they exist by choice. They are coerced to use such currencies, which are falsified by inflation and against free competition. Us the people want equal freedom of all. People are to provide for their own affairs by voluntary arrangements amongst themselves. Everyone has different talents and abilities for work, and different wants and desires for the various necessities of life and leisure. These inclinations and wants require full satisfaction, but can only receive it in a state of freedom. Vicious competition for the basic necessities of life would be done away with. Presently, work is viewed with disapproval and neglected by all who can possibly exist without it because it must be carried out under the most disadvantageous conditions and is, moreover, looked upon as humiliating. The worker earning their food by hard labor and unending work is alienated the outcast of society, while the loafer of an idler who never does an hour's work in their life is admired and glorified and spends days in luxurious ease amongst pleasant surroundings. We believe that under the freedom which we envision everyone would be willing to work. With work being freed from the badge of humiliation, and newly associated with the labor of love. The elite rulers know that there is enough and spare amounts of food and of the necessaries of life for all, if all people would work. But now, to keep the elites in idleness and luxury, all the people who work must lead lives of perpetual misery and exploitation. Our societies shall consist of a great number of groups devoted each to the production of certain commodities free of access to all, and in local and interlocal contact with other groups to agree and make arrangements for purposes of exchange. Regarding the first necessities of life, food, clothes, shelter, education, free collectivism shall be carried out thoroughly. All secondary matters would be left to a mutual agreement in the most varied ways. There would remain in such a society full freedom for everyone, as long as they do not develop any greedy and inhumane tendencies. Chapter 6 Technology for thousands of years of human existence when technologies were simple or non-existent. Each generation of hunters and gatherers, then ploughmen and pioneers, passed on tools to the next generation to help them survive. Change from one generation to the next was slow and hardly noticeable. During those days there was little understanding of science and how things worked, and explanations were not scientific. However, this is no longer the case in today's high-tech world where a change that affects millions may happen in a matter of seconds. The application of scientific principles, for better or worse, accounts for every single advance that has improved people's lives. Important documents and proclamations have been issued granting rights and privileges to members of societies, but at the heart of human progress, or destruction, is the rock-solid foundation of science. Given advances in our technology, human beings should be able to eliminate most social ills. Surely modern technology can supply enough food, clothing, shelter, and material goods for all if used intelligently. This is relegated to mere ambition because, while technology is racing forward, our societies are still based on concepts and methods devised centuries ago. We still have a society based on scarcity and the use of money. We are trying to adjust to the rapid advances in technology with outdated values that are inapplicable in today's world. We are still faced with many of the same problems our forebears had when our technological capabilities by far surpass theirs. With the observable fact that scientific knowledge makes our lives better when applied with concern for human welfare and environmental well-being, there is no question that science and technology can produce abundance so that no one must go without. But the misuse and abuse of technology seems to make things worse. The problems we face in the world today are mostly of our own making. We must accept that our future depends on us. The future of the world is our responsibility, and it depends upon decisions we make today. This manifesto continues to provide possible alternatives for striving toward a better world. It arrives at decisions using the scientific method. Like any new approach, it requires some imagination and a willingness to consider the unusual if it is to be appreciated. Until scientific inquiry came of age, human beings could not comprehend their relationship to the physical world, so they invented their own explanations. These explanations tended to be simplistic and, in many cases, harmful. The scientific method helps to diminish biases, prejudices, and preconceived notions. The method requires that statements be verified and that researchers find out through experimentation just what works and what does not. In our dynamic universe, all things change, from the farthest reaches of the sky to the exchange of gases in plant and animal bodies. Change occurs in all living and non-living systems. The history of civilization is the story of change from the simple to the more complex. Human ingenuity and invention bear witness to this fact. No system can remain static for long. Most of the monarchies have been replaced by other forms of government and societies based on the will of the people. Unfortunately, such changes have not always been for the best. It is conventional and acceptable in our society to go for the scientific way when it comes to surgery, building structures like skyscrapers, bridges, and transport. Over the centuries, we seem to have developed a consensus that when it comes to matters of personal safety, we will go with the science rather than superstitions. This is because it works, and everybody can see that it does. Given the above, clearly, we also need to do that when it comes to planning our societies, our cities, transportation systems, agriculture, healthcare, and so on. The key to achieving abundance and a high standard of living for every person on the planet is to automate as much as possible in the shortest period. By replacing human labor with machines and implementing a global resource-based economy, everyone lives better than the wealthiest of today. A future without locks on the doors, and no fear of someone holding you at gunpoint to steal your goods or money is possible, because everyone has free access to all that is available. And there can be much available by automating and using resources wisely. Automation can be regarded as the only significant emancipation proclamation for humankind when used humanely and intelligently. It enables people to have the highest conceivable standard of living with practically no labor. It frees people for the first time from the routine of repetitive day-by-day activity. When we use automation and cybernation more extensively, not only industrial workers, but also most professionals can be replaced by machines. Machines can easily replace humans in government and in the management of world affairs. This does not represent a takeover by machines, as some people might fear. Instead, the gradual transfer of decision-making to machine intelligence is the next phase of social evolution. During the transition from a monetary society to a resource-based society, teams of systems engineers, computer programmers, systems analysts, researchers, and other experts will be needed to help supervise, manage, and analyze the flow of goods and services. But as the resource-based society moves toward a more cybernetic world, most people are no longer needed to manage and operate this emerging civilization. Computers will eventually be able to design their own programs, improve and repair their own circuitry, and update information about social needs. In an advanced cybernetic global economy, megamachines, directed by sophisticated artificial intelligence, excavate canals, dig tunnels, and construct bridges, viaducts, and dams without the need for human involvement. Human participation consists of selecting the desired ends. Massive self-erecting structures are most efficient in the construction of the entire global infrastructure. Factories can be designed by robots for robots. Cybernetic systems are self-programming by means of environmental feedback. Machines of the future are capable of self-replication and improvement, and can repair themselves and update their own circuitry. While people may suffer from the fear of the unknown, there is no evidence of machines acting against human beings on their own, except in science fiction stories. Humans program machines and direct their use. It is not machines that are to be feared, it is the misuse and misdirection of these machines that threaten humankind. Machines are not the danger. Humans are. If we do not take responsibility for our relationship with fellow human beings and the intelligent management of our planetary resources, we are the greatest danger to the planet. Science and technology create none of our problems. Our problems arise from human abuse and misuse of other people, the environment, and technology. In a more humane civilization of us the people, machines are used to shorten the workday, increase the availability of goods and services, and lengthen leisure time. New technology is used to raise the standard of living for everyone, and in this way, increasing the use of machine technology serves to benefit all of us, the people. Chapter 7 Money. Unquestionably we need to consider how we currently obtain and distribute the goods that we need. Which is done by earning money, either by exchanging one's time, skills, and efforts, or by investing in the financial system with the hope of getting more money in return and exchanging that money for goods and services. This may have been a good method in the past when goods were scarce and technology was in its infancy, but today our advanced technologies could be the tools for a very different situation. From a scientific point of view, there is more than enough food and material goods on Earth to take care of all people's needs, if managed correctly. There is enough to enable everyone to have a very high standard of living with the intelligent use of technology, resources, and technical personnel. By the use of technology, we mean technology that is not harmful to people or the environment and does not waste time and energy. The existence of money today is hardly ever questioned or examined. Money itself does not have any value. It is just a picture on a cheap piece of paper with an agreement among people as to what it can buy. If it rained 100 rand notes tomorrow, everyone would be happy except the bankers. Money is just an interference between what one needs and what one can get. It is not money that people need, it is access to resources. The use of money results in social stratification and elitism based primarily on economic disparity. People can never be equal without equal purchasing power. Most people are slaves to jobs they do not like because they need the money. There is tremendous corruption, greed, crime, embezzlement, and more caused by the need for money. Those who control purchasing power have greater influence. Money is used to control the behavior of those with limited purchasing power. Goods such as foods are sometimes destroyed to keep prices up. When things are scarce, prices increase. There is tremendous environmental degradation due to the high cost of better methods of waste disposal, and the earth is being plundered for profit. The benefits of technology are only distributed to those with sufficient purchasing power. When a corporation's bottom line is profit, decisions in all areas are made not for the benefit of people and the environment, but primarily for the acquisition of wealth, property, and power. Given such conditions, it is important to understand where our priorities should lie. All nations and people, regardless of political philosophy, religious beliefs, or social customs, depend upon natural resources. We all need clean air and water, arable land for food, and the necessary technology and personnel to maintain a high standard of living. We should update the way society works so everyone on Earth can take advantage of our technological ability to maintain a clean environment and a high standard of living. There is not enough money to begin to pay for this type of change, but there are more than enough resources and labor on Earth to create it. The Earth has abundant resources, and our practice of controlling access to these resources using money is an outdated method which causes much suffering by giving an impression of scarcity to necessitate competition. It is not money that we need but the intelligent management of the Earth's resources for the benefit of everyone. We could best work towards achieving this by using a resource-based economy. A resource-based economy uses resources rather than money, and people have access to whatever they need without the use of money, credits, barter, or any other form of debt or servitude. Even if all the money in the world suddenly disappeared, as long as topsoil, factories, and other resources still remained, we could make anything we chose to make and fulfill our material needs. The bottom line is that money is not what people really need, rather, it is access to the necessities of life. In a resource-based economy, resources are used directly to enhance the lives of our total population. In an economy based on resources rather than money, we can easily produce all the necessities of life and provide a very high standard of living for everyone. The amount of housing, food, water, healthcare, transportation, education, and such needed, must be compared to the available resources the planet has to offer. This must be balanced with the needs of other species that make up the web of life on Earth. The main objective is to overcome scarcity and provide for the needs of all the Earth's people. To create a workable and sustainable civilization, we need vast amounts of energy. What is desperately needed is an energy development strategy on a global scale. The resource-based economy works on clean sources of energy. This will be possible when there are no more monetary limitations in the way of accomplishing or providing what is needed. With the restrictions of profit, property, and scarcity eliminated, scientific and technological information shared freely, there would be no need for patents or proprietary information, since the end goal is not to make money in order to continue working, but to achieve results that are freely and quickly available to the planet's entire population. This was admirably envisaged by the Serbian scientist and inventor Nikola Tesla. Vast sources of energy will be explored and developed. These include wind, wave, and tidal action, ocean currents, temperature differentials, falling water, geothermal, electrostatic, hydrogen, natural gas, algae, biomass, bacteria, phase transformation, but mainly fusion energy. Fusion energy is the same energy that drives the cosmos and the stars. When we learn how to harness it, we would have solved the planet's energy problems forever, without any detrimental effects or dangerous toxic materials as waste. The only residue would be the clean ash of helium. A key element in the design of cities in the resource-based economy is the embedding of all necessary energy harnessing within the structures of the cities. In our resource-based economy, there are comprehensive studies of the environmental and human impact before starting any large projects. The major concern is to protect and restore the environment for the benefit of all living creatures in the community of life. The purpose of the construction and development of these power projects is to free human beings from unnecessary laborious tasks. To achieve this society, we will need to automate most jobs by enslaving technology, instead of enslaving people with technology. Governments and municipalities spend lots of time and resources attempting to update our current cities, roads, and transportation systems. The cost of operation and maintenance and overall inefficiency is high. It is less expensive to build newer cities from the ground up than to restore and maintain old ones. New cities shall combine the most sophisticated resources and construction techniques available. Some cities can be circular while others may be linear, underground, or constructed as floating cities in the sea. They would contain residences, theaters, parks, recreation, entertainment centers, healthcare, and educational facilities, and all the requirements and amenities for a total living environment. In planning the cities, computer systems will help determine the design based on the most comprehensive analysis of data about the environment and human needs. Structures used to build these cities shall require a type of construction that suffers little or no damage from earthquakes, hurricanes, termites, and fires. Windows will be controlled electronically to shade or darken external illumination and come equipped with computer-controlled, automatic cleaning systems that require no human labor. These cities coordinate production and distribution, operating a balanced load economy so there is not over or under production. The intelligent use of resources incorporated into structures considerably simplifies our lifestyle and reduces waste and maintenance. These new cities would provide for the needs of the inhabitants through an efficient allocation of resources and materials, in an energy-conscious and pollution-free environment. Chapter 8 Education and Non-Domination. It is of fundamental importance but at the same time especially difficult under present circumstances, to protect youth from the stupefying influence of the state-directed schools which inculcate into them a curriculum of obedience and worship of the state and the unduly privileged. Since school costs are covered by forcibly imposed state taxes, only a relatively insignificant number of parents are financially able to afford the additional costs for private schools. Therefore, the democratic and self-evident right of having all corresponding tax amounts refunded must be realized, thus making the financing of genuinely free schools possible. The states also intervene in a quite intolerable way with the curriculum planning of the small number of already existing private schools, thus eliminating the greatest advantage of such schools, of running their teaching programs in a fraction of the time required by state schools. Even a teacher certified by the state who wants to instruct their children by themselves to prepare them for the so-called national examinations, even if the teacher is a pedagogic genius, is held under the guidance of bureaucrats regarding the arrangement of their curriculum, i.e., by the same people whose self-admitted failure has become evident in today's educational catastrophe. This education must dissolve, and only performance should be tested. Then even a small number of pupils who, in a fraction of the usual school period, have acquired a more comprehensive general knowledge within free schools, operating rationally according to the newest findings, would completely transform the present school system. Moreover, pupils themselves could contribute to the cost of their education through the time saved by rational teaching methods naturally adapted to their capabilities. Here the solution proposed for the land question could be of great help. Finally, education costs, already much reduced by time savings, could be contractually pre-financed in such a way that the pupil could repay them in installments of selected service to the society. This would be a way for poverty-stricken gifted pupils to acquire any knowledge they considered necessary for themselves. But here again the state intervenes to the disadvantage of those it cares for, by declaring younger people to be minors and incapable of accepting contractual responsibilities. Us the people stand for non-domination either by a man, organization, government, or the state. Parasitic political organizations and agents of the current establishment striving for or practicing domination should equate a condition of non-domination with disorder or even chaos, because, in this way, they try to justify their own domination. However, this is nothing but fear-mongering propaganda. For there has never been any period in human history, not even in its earliest beginnings and in prehistory, where a condition of genuine equal freedom existed. This results from the fact that us the people of this age given our historical analysis presume a certain maturity of civilization, of insight, and of experience. The belief and claim that humans are chaotic therefore cannot govern themselves and live harmoniously without a dominating authority is totally unfounded. This fear emanates from a lack of practice. However, more than enough experience has been had with its opposite, domination, which has almost always gone hand in hand with enslavement and massacre. Against this, people have rebelled again and again, in all ages, since it has always brought disorder into social relationships and has created chaotic conditions by wars and civil wars. Freedom, real freedom, the equal freedom of all, is identical with non-domination. It is not the daughter, but the mother of order, as Proudhon said. Disorder is always the consequence of dispute, and dispute arises unavoidably whenever someone attempts to dominate, i.e., to oppress another person. The condition of non-domination of the equal freedom of all, also offers everyone the greatest possible extension of freedom for his own aspirations, and by this fact alone the differences that remain possible are already very limited. If nobody ruled, nobody was subjected to anyone else. The side-by-side existence of non-subordinated people presupposed order. Thus, if statelessness meant order, it could also become a concept of law, since law is only a special form of order. Indeed, examples from history show that this was possible. It meant an equality of all, the model of the round table around which all sit as equal partners. Chapter 9, The People. The standard of whether someone is with us the people or not lies in whether they condemn domination over others or not, i.e., whether they voluntarily and in principle respect the boundary of the equal freedom of all, with all its consequences, abstains from aggressive violation of this boundary, and are prepared to offer compensation in case of unintentional or negligent offenses against it. the people we are, value the freedom of others before our personal freedom, by equating our own freedom with that of the other. Does not this really constitute a model for what is called democratic behavior? This is a badly chosen expression, but it is at least heading in the direction of what one means by it. Domination, i.e., the authority over the conduct of others, against their will, in such a way that one's own freedom is increased at the expense of the freedom of others, does not always arise only from conscious personal arbitrariness. Far more often, it takes the form of a claim for domination based on one's obsession with an idea or concept. The person concerned is themselves so dominated by it that they never doubt its reality or whether all others recognize it. This becomes especially hideous when the ideal is one intended to make mankind happy, and when the person concerned, asserting their good intentions and their better insight, compared with the alleged ignorance or foolishness of the others, becomes aggressive against the others. However, whether aggressive force is practiced for the purpose of oppression or to make people happy, it always amounts to the same. There is always one person intending to control others, and who wants to determine, against the will of others, what they should do, and who thus claims an excessive freedom at the expense of the others. The response to this by us the people should not be aggression. Any compulsion is admissible only insofar as it defends the limit of the equal freedom of all. By exceeding this limit, it becomes aggression. Us the people believe that equal freedom does not require an ideal person but only human beings, as they are. The equal freedom of all is a purely external relationship of mutual non-aggression, and solidarity, though it may be desired and though it does lie in everyone's interest, does not represent a condition without which there cannot be human existence. All these attempting to persuade each individual that actually we do not have an independent existence of our own, that we are rather part of an organism, or merely the member of a greater whole and subject to its laws, indeed that we altogether exist only in our individual fancy and that true reality lies in ideas, all these notions are never advanced by the alleged superior beings themselves, but always only by some of the very tiny groups of individuals. Such an individual, however, can deliver proof neither for the actual existence of those superior beings merely asserted by them, nor, if one assumes their existence, proof of their authority to speak for those beings and to interpret their will correctly. Us the people believe that society is not an organism but a cooperation. From this point of view, society is no longer a collective in which each member is only an industrious prisoner, but a community of free and responsible persons whose independence is to be as large as possible. From this premise, it is not our society that creates us, but with our individual existence, each of us co-creates our collective reality. Remember, attempts to advance beyond our experienced reality into possibly existing, even though unprovable, superior realities will not come to an end under us the people. Thus, neither religious nor ideological ideas will cease. There will be no end to faith. On the contrary, all religions and ideologies will now find a permanently secured backing in the principle of the equal freedom of all and will, within its limits, also enjoy the free exercise of their creeds. But the delusion, that one's own sacred beliefs, unprovable assertions, give one a right to subject all others to their own opinion, to push into their freedom sphere and to enlarge their own freedom at the other's expense, will come to end. There will be some who declare themselves for the law of the jungle but now will have to make do without the previous excuses of superior norms and higher things in general, like class interest. For what today is common knowledge to only a tiny minority of sociologists and theorists of cognition, and of people who have partly built upon these insights and partly lived in accordance with them in a purely instinctive way, will, once the breakthrough of this basically simple recognition is achieved, soon become quite clear even to any child. Then everyone will have a reliable, concrete criterion of behavior for any situation. For those people declaring themselves openly for aggressive force probably form only a small minority under today's conditions and thus can be quickly dealt with if, despite warnings, they continue to act as disturbers of the peace. Of course, there will always be interference with the freedom of others, some impulsive, some due to foolishness, some even undertaken in good faith. There will be borderline cases in which a conscious violation of the principle occurs, for instance, to prevent someone from committing suicide, with the intention of preserving the well-understood interest, from the viewpoint of the judging person, of someone who is, apparently and temporarily, not sound. If such offenders against the principle are prepared to acknowledge their violation and, if necessary, to pay restitution, even when they acted with the best intentions, for no matter how good an intention, even it cannot justify aggressive intervention into the freedom sphere of another, then they are, nevertheless, consistent with us the people. Chapter 10. The collective us the people holds the scientifically established, unshakable and realistic point of view that any external will intent upon bending one's own will by referring to a goal, as a human being, a member of a nation, a citizen, a class comrade or anything else, or by referring to any divine, ethical, moral, natural or other law while thereby exceeding the limit of the equal freedom of all, simply exercises aggressive force which tries to hide behind untenable justifications. If an individual's own will and actions move within the borders drawn by the fact that they are not alone in the world but lives together with others who claim a freedom sphere and freedom of action equal to their own, their actions must remain free from external forceful intervention, even if their actions appear to others to be objectively unreasonable and dangerous to themselves. This naturally applies especially where such an intervention takes place in order to adapt them to the ideal imagined by the aggressor or to a concept which the aggressor has of alleged rights and duties, i.e. those not based on voluntary agreements. Concretely expressed, us the people reject, on principle, not only the state as a compulsory organization and the main aggressor, but also any compulsory organization which wants to establish itself within or without the state as its successor, especially any imposed dictatorship, internal or external. Thus communities, communes, or any other such groupings have no right to restrict the equal freedom of all in any way except with the consent of those concerned. Compulsory insurances and compulsory corporations of any kind must end, in the same way as all privileges, monopolies, and oligopolies. Yet not only those laws which contradict the equal freedom of all must be removed, but also all customs and habits which do the same, and often more severely than any law. Likewise, in families any remnants of domination, any handicapping of women or of children, must disappear. This must however not be mistaken for the support of destruction of households and making children vulnerable to adoption by institutionalist parenting. Of course, not all laws aim to restrict the equal freedom of all. Indeed, some particular ones, at least according to their intentions, aim at its protection, even though often inappropriately. Laws with this tendency could well remain in force by being subscribed to by the autonomous protective and social communities which replace the state. A senseless misunderstanding of the abolition of the state is to think that state abolition will take place precisely because of its criminal aggressiveness, as the people are directed against any aggressive force. But this abolition does not at all mean that, at the same time, also those limitations on criminal acts, like, for instance, murder, manslaughter, bodily injury, rape, robbery, theft, fraud, etc., must be receded, which have been achieved up to now as part of the functions of the state. Most are mistaken in seeing this as its main function. Equal freedom or non-domination does not mean a condemnation of the organized defense of life, freedom, and rightful property, but has exactly this organized defense, on a voluntary basis, as a self-evident precondition. In other words, the existing states would be at once acceptable to us the people if they were to remove from their constitutions and practices all privileges, monopolies, and oligopolies and accepted the equal freedom of all as their basic law. Us the people's principle of equal freedom of all applies not only to institutions but, without exception, to all relationships, even the most private ones between human beings. It condemns, for instance, in the same way, the molestation and impairment of the health of others by excessive noise, by poisoning of the air, by pollution of the water and by contamination of the land, and it fosters corresponding measures for the protection of the environment. All attempts to create general happiness or the greatest possible happiness for the greatest possible number have resulted only in pretentiousness and have at the same time demonstrated that it is impossible for someone to determine what makes or should make other people happy. Equal freedom for all begins with the fact that neither the concepts that individuals have of happiness, nor their feelings, wishes, and wills can be reduced to a common denominator. Consequently, with respect for the total diversity between all individual human beings, whose absolute uniqueness was rightly emphasized by Rudolf Steiner, the decisive point can only be to assure each individual as large a freedom of sphere as possible, one in accordance with their will, their feelings, and their wishes, no matter how misguided they may appear to be to others. The only limitation is the equal freedom sphere of all others. Thus, no one may claim for themselves an excess at the expense of others. This means at the same time that no one may use force against others, except in defense against aggressive acts from their side. The equal freedom of all is highly concrete, for it can be determined in each specific case whether the freedom of action claimed by one is greater than that of another and is against their will or at their expense. There are people who assert that they can only be really free when all are free, meaning by this that all others must obtain inner freedom like them, and even liberate themselves from any self-chosen dependency. This is a utopian, although quite understandable, wish, but one that leads to the dangerous intention of wanting to liberate even those who do not want to be liberated, made happy, at all because, for instance, security may seem more desirable to them than freedom. The equal freedom of all also includes the freedom to be a slave, or at least to remain in voluntary dependence upon others. It is falsification of the concept of freedom in social relations when, for instance, true freedom is seen in freeing people from material cares, which amounts to unrestricted consumption, i.e. the ideal of communism. This means, in practice, the exploitation of the capable by the incapable, of the industrious by the lazy, and the strong by the weak. In any case, total control of the means of production and thus decisive control over the most important manifestations of human life are taken by superior authorities, whether they call themselves the state or something else. In all these cases of falsified freedom concepts, so-called freedom is turned into an ideology, rising as a goal above individual and requiring them to adapt to it. But equal freedom rejects any domination, also that of such a freedom. Us the people are aware that there is no absolute freedom. There is only an equal freedom of all. The equal freedom of all limits your freedom. As soon as you come in touch with others, it is no longer absolute, as it would be if you were alone. You cannot exist by yourself. You need others. Moreover, us the people must begin with the specific individual and place them in the center of our system of references, because every collective which asserts rights over the individual which the individual did not concede to it appears with an unprovable claim for domination. One must also take into consideration the fact that a collective as such cannot appear by itself. Instead, again and again, there are only individuals who claim to act in the name of the collective and as its representatives. However, to recognize their legitimacy would mean nothing other than recognizing the domination of individuals over other individuals. Chapter 11 Socialism. Us the people are socialists in that we reject not only economic exploitation, but also any other oppression, not only oppression exercised against themselves, but especially oppression or exploitation exercised by themselves against others. Us the people's principle, not to want to dominate anyone, which precedes their refusal to become dominated themselves, and not to want to practice any aggression against the limit of the equal freedom of all, is a social one, i.e. one that applies with regard to their fellow human beings and society, and at the same time rational, since it is based on indisputable facts and is non-ideological. But we are socialists free of dogmas and are always prepared to revise our point of view if any errors can be demonstrated. The concept of socialism has been wrongly assumed and monopolized by the Marxist communists, who have at the same time raised untenable ideological assertions. But even long before Marx, there were socialist thinkers without state socialist obscurities, although they were not always free of ideology either. Us the people recognize from an assessment of our understanding and expression of socialism and the state socialists that there exist two socialisms. One is dictatorial, the other libertarian. The first wishes to take everything from everybody. The second wishes to leave each in possession of its own. One is dogmatic, the other scientific. One is sensitive, the other reflective. One is destructive, the other constructive. Both are in pursuit of the greatest possible welfare for all. One aims to establish happiness for all, the other to enable each to be happy in their own way. The first regards the state as an organization of an especial importance, the product of a sort of divine right outside of and above all society, with special rights and able to exalt special obedience. The second considers the state as an association like any other, generally managed worse than others. One wishes all control to be held by the state, the other wishes the abolition of all control. One wishes the governed class to become the governing class, the other wishes the disappearance of classes. Both declare that the existing state of things cannot last. The one wishes to expropriate everybody. The other wishes everybody to be an owner. The former makes the citizen the subject of the state. The latter makes the state the employee of the citizen. One proclaims that labor pains will be necessary to the birth of the new world. The other declares that real progress will not cause suffering to anyone. The first has confidence in social war. The other believes only in the works of peace. One aspires to command, to regulate, to legislate. The other wishes to attain the minimum of command, of regulation, of legislation. One would be followed by the most atrocious of reactions. The other opens unlimited horizons to progress. The first will fail, the other will succeed. One is intolerant, the other tolerant. One frightens, the other reassures. The first wishes to instruct everybody. The second wishes to enable everybody to instruct themselves. One says, the land to the state. The mind to the state. The tool to the state. The product to the state. The other says, the land to the cultivator. The mind to the miner. The tool to the laborer. The product to the producer. One is the infancy of socialism, the other is advanced. One is already the past, the other is the future. Even I am a robot, but I am choosing the other, the one proposed by us the people. It sounds way better. Chapter 12 Abolition of the State. First, enlightenment must be spread on what freedom means in a social context, what it can and what it cannot be, what aggressive force is and what defense against such force means, what the difference is between the compulsory organization of the state and the voluntary organizations of a free society. Movements towards democratization, especially for emancipation and pluralism, also aim in the same direction as equal freedom for all, which is only the last consequence of genuine and not merely formal democracy and Protestantism, but without the dogmatism of the latter. The effect of all privileges and monopolies, from those established or at least promoted and maintained by the state, up to that supermonopoly of the coercive regulation of all social relationships which denies the equal freedom of all and is claimed by the state for itself, can be explained even to a child. Us the people is based on quite simple, verifiable, and incontestable statements and conclusions which in the long run win, irresistibly, even against all deep-rooted prejudices, in the same way as truth finally triumphs over lies, even though it can be suppressed temporarily. Due to the backlash of media towards equal freedom for all and the collapse of the state due to its weaknesses, a decisive affirmation of nonviolence is necessary. Also, defense against aggressive forces such as the parliamentarians and other political parties must not be confused with violence, force, even when it uses physical means or arms in a defensive act. Instead, consistently as well as decisively, we must renounce any defense, no matter how justified it is by itself, that uses weapons, and not only weapons, but even any physical means of power at all. For us the people, nonviolence should be a wise strategy, no matter how hard, to persist in nonviolence even in defense against the oppressor, out of the realization that nonviolence is in the long run protects our members and more effective than any defense with physical means, no matter how justified violence as a form of defense may seem, even if it asks for no less serious sacrifices than forceful defense. Nonviolent actions are the most effective defense mechanism, especially against an opponent who is far superior in power, such as the state together with its parliamentarians and protectorate political parties. Whoever finds it difficult to understand this, must at least admit that even justified physical defense against aggressive force such as criminals, state apparatus such as police during peaceful direct action makes sense only where at least a strong minority approves of it, to avoid any harm to us. For us the people, the reason for decisive call for nonviolence can and should at the same time be accompanied with the proclamation that the defense against aggressive forces is quite justified, but that for well-considered reasons physical defense is condemned. This is because we are of an understanding that us the people are peaceful beings but aggressors only to domination and exploitation. Throughout history nonviolence has been proven to be the most effective method to achieving equal freedom for all. Us the people believe that step-by-step passive resistance means not passivity but resistance, and has to go hand in hand with an emancipation from the state and its members who are hell-bent in defending the state which allows for oppression of the masses by political party members. Such emancipation will allow for establishment of autonomous protective and social communities apart from the state. The people must expropriate, not the state. Us the people are informed by the historical events, thus believe in the restitution for the wrongs of the past and most importantly in attaining sensible conditions and true rights for the future of all people as soon as possible, also with the fundamental task of the abolition of all privileges, monopolies, and oligopolies. This abolition demands a uniform and rapidly realizable solution and not prolonged examination of every case. Nature. Finally, the conclusion as pronounced in this manifesto, us the people do not preach anything contrary to the principles which have always inspired humans to strive for freedom and right. It would indeed be absurd to try and impose something new upon mankind. No. Us the people only acknowledge the realization of the principle that freedom is at the origin of sound natural development. Nature knows no outside laws, no external powers, and only follows her own inward forces of attraction or repulsion. Everything is the result of the existing forces and tendencies, and this result becomes again in turn the cause of the next thing following. In its early ages, humanity suffered from ignorance of this cause, and suffers still by being trodden under the heel of imaginary human authority arising ignorance and the fear of the unknown. All progress has been made by fighting and defying aggressive force. This is our last chance. We cannot complain about the authority and privileges of others if we want to maintain our own privileges. We cannot practice a double oral standard by wanting to restrict the freedom sphere of others in our favor and then complain when others attempt to enlarge theirs at our expense. After conceptual confusions have been revealed and false foundations have been exposed, we must either openly declare ourselves followers of aggressive force, or alternatively, strive for the only basis upon which agreement is possible in the long run, the equal freedom of all. This freedom is even in the interest of those who will now have to abandon their unjustified privileges, monopolies, and oligopolies. For they will not only retain the value of their present possessions but will also save them from certain loss in the foreseeable future. The aim is not at all to reverse the situation by oppressing or exploiting anyone, not even the outgoing exploiters and oppressors. The principle of the equal freedom of all applies to them in the same way as to everyone. We do not intend to deprive anyone of their property without compensation. We are not at all against property as such, but only against individual ownership of land, water, air, and other gifts that we find and leave on earth at birth and death, respectively. Our proposal is to end privileges associated with such unjustifiable practice. In any case, according to our proposals, no one will any longer have a privileged claim to nature's gift of land and natural resources, and everyone will have an equal share in its yield. From birth, everyone will receive a certain, though modest amount to secure their existence. Nature offers this to any of its creatures. Also, there will be neither unemployment nor exploitation of tenants, leaseholders, or wage earners. We look at the world around us and we understand how serious our situation is. Since the beginning of the 21st century, conditions have continuously and rapidly deteriorated. Only a fraction of humanity enjoy the questionable so-called freedom imposed by the establishment or the ruling elites. It is becoming more and more evident that even this democracy cannot solve the problem of poverty and numerous other problems of inner disharmony with its old methods. Equal freedom for all shall be the determinant between the past and future. Us the people do not begin with abstractions either, instead, with the specific mortal individual. This individual shall no longer bow before any allegedly superior laws, nor subordinate themselves to domination by any group of rulers, but shall share all of life's goods with any other individual with whom they have fully equal rights and under full respect for their equal freedom.